What would you do if a child you've never met called you grandpa in a cemetery? For Thomas Lewin, powerful CEO of a pharmaceutical empire, this innocent word shatters the carefully constructed narrative of his grief. His son Alex died 2 years ago, or did he? As Thomas follows a trail of mysterious clues, he discovers his son had a secret life protecting 3 identical blue-eyed boys with an inexplicable connection to the Lewin family. Now Thomas must confront a devastating truth. His son's death was no accident, and the same powerful forces that silenced Alex are hunting these children. With each revelation, the danger grows closer, forcing this emotionally distant executive to make an impossible choice between preserving the company he built and honoring the legacy his son died to protect. Some secrets are buried for a reason, but what if uncovering them is the only way to save innocent lives? Follow our channel for more heart-stopping stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from, and share what you would do if faced with Thomas's impossible choice. The crisp autumn air of Pine Hollow carried the scent of damp earth and dying leaves as Thomas Arthur Lewin guided his Mercedes along the narrow gravel road leading to the municipal cemetery. The wheels crunched rhythmically beneath him, each turn bringing him closer to a ritual he'd performed monthly for the past 2 years. Through the windshield, rows of granite and marble stones emerged from the morning mist like silent sentinels. Thomas adjusted his tie, a habit born from 30 years as CEO of Lewin Pharma, though nobody would see him here. The dashboard clock read 7:15 a.m., early enough to avoid curious eyes, late enough for sufficient light. An old Sinatra tune filtered through the premium speakers, the melancholy notes filling the car until Thomas abruptly silenced it as he pulled into the deserted parking area. For a moment, he sat motionless, hands still gripping the leather-wrapped steering wheel, knuckles white. The cemetery spread before him, 18 acres of neatly arranged plots and manicured paths. His gaze drifted to the eastern corner where a black granite headstone stood beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak. With mechanical precision, Thomas stepped out, the cold air stinging his cheeks. His Italian leather shoes, polished to a mirror shine, seemed absurdly formal against the muddy gravel. He straightened his cashmere overcoat and circled to the rear of the vehicle. The trunk opened with a soft hydraulic hiss. Inside lay 2 items, positioned with careful deliberation: a wooden toy box, hand-carved with trains and airplanes that a child's fingers would never touch, and a photograph, creased from repeated folding and unfolding. Thomas lifted the box as if it contained fragile crystal rather than wooden toy cars and action figures still in their original packaging. A passerby might have noticed the dissonance. A man who controlled a pharmaceutical empire worth billions, whose decisions affected thousands of employees, now struggling to maintain his composure before a small wooden box. The corporate mask he wore daily, the one that announced quarterly earnings with unwavering confidence and negotiated mergers without flinching, slipped momentarily, revealing something raw underneath. Thomas walked the familiar path, gripping the box with one hand and clutching the photograph with the other. His footfalls echoed in the morning stillness. 23 steps from the car to the path, 112 steps along the winding stone walkway, 17 more to the gravestone. Alexander James Lewin. The inscription read, "Beloved son, 1995-2023. Thomas knelt, uncaring of the mud that would stain his tailored pants. With trembling fingers, he placed the toy box at the base of the stone. From his pocket, he retrieved a small candle and a box of matches. 3 attempts before the match caught, the flame dancing weakly against the breeze. The earth beneath his manicured nails felt foreign, a tactile reminder of a reality he spent most days avoiding through board meetings and spreadsheets. Here, numbers and projections offered no comfort, no distraction from the hollowness that had consumed him since the phone call 2 years ago. As he arranged the items, the candle in its holder, the box positioned just so, his mind wandered to the last conversation he'd had with Alex. Terse words exchanged over dinner, complaints about Alex's lack of interest in joining the company, Thomas's disappointment poorly disguised as concern. How trivial those corporate aspirations seemed now, measured against the finality of death. Thomas smoothed the photograph against the cold stone. Alex at 25, smiling beside a lake, holding up a fish with boyish pride, a moment Thomas had been too busy to witness in person. He stood to leave, not ready to turn and face the headstone directly. The weight of unspoken words and missed opportunities pressed against his chest. heavier than any corporate decision he'd ever made. It was then that he noticed them, 3 small figures standing about 50 yards away near a cluster of modest gravestones. Children by their size, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, placing wildflowers on a grave with solemn care. Their clothes were worn, mismatched, a stark contrast to the pristine cemetery grounds. Thomas squinted against the morning light. Something about their presence disturbed the carefully constructed narrative of his grief, an unexpected variable in an equation he thought he understood. As he watched, one of the boys, the smallest of the 3, with a mop of dark hair that needed cutting, suddenly looked up. Their eyes met across the distance, the child's face registering something Thomas couldn't identify. Then, inexplicably, the boy raised his hand and called out a single word. "Grandpa?" The voice, thin and uncertain, carried across the cemetery with unnatural clarity, slicing through Thomas's carefully maintained composure like a scalpel through skin. The word hung in the air between them, impossible and devastating. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. His son had no children. He had no grandchildren. Yet the boy's voice had rung with recognition, not question. Behind the children stood a woman, gaunt, her face etched with lines beyond her years, dark circles beneath hollow eyes. She placed protective hands on the shoulders of 2 of the boys. Her gaze locked on Thomas with an expression that mingled fear and recognition. In that moment, the carefully compartmentalized grief that Thomas had managed for 2 years collapsed into something else entirely, a terrible suspicion that the narrative of his son's life and death might contain chapters he knew nothing about. His legs suddenly unsteady, Thomas reached for the headstone to maintain his balance. The polished granite felt cold beneath his palm. In the distance, the woman was hurriedly gathering the children, whispering urgently to them. Their small faces turned toward Thomas with an intensity that made his chest tighten. The smallest boy continued to stare, his hand still partially raised, as if frozen in the moment of recognition. A gust of wind carried the scent of the wildflowers they'd placed. Not store-bought arrangements, but humble dandelions and daisies gathered from roadside patches. Thomas took one halting step forward, then another. The distance between them seemed both infinite and terrifyingly small. The morning sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the scene with cruel clarity. 3 boys with matching dark hair, the same height, the same build, triplets perhaps, and on the smallest one's wrist, as he lowered his arm, a birthmark or scar that Thomas couldn't quite make out. "Who?" Thomas began, but the word emerged as barely more than a whisper. The woman was already pulling the children away, their reluctant feet dragging through the damp grass. The smallest boy looked back once, his eyes, a startling, familiar blue, meeting Thomas's with a gaze that seemed to contain both question and accusation. As they disappeared around a row of monuments, Thomas stood rooted to the spot, the carefully constructed narrative of his grief suddenly riddled with questions he had never thought to ask. Behind him, the candle flame flickered in the morning breeze, casting trembling shadows across the name carved in stone. Thomas stood frozen for several heartbeats, his breath creating small clouds in the chilly morning air. The encounter had shattered something inside him, a certainty about his son's life that he'd never thought to question. His expensive leather shoes sank slightly into the damp earth as he took one hesitant step forward, then another, gaining momentum with each movement toward the direction the woman and children had disappeared. The sound of his footsteps echoed across the silent cemetery, deliberate, measured, the cadence of a man accustomed to moving with purpose through boardrooms and executive halls. But now that confidence was merely a thin veneer over growing turmoil. His heart pounded against his ribs with such force that he pressed his hand to his chest as if to contain it. As he rounded the cluster of modest gravestones, he caught sight of them again. The woman was hurrying the 3 boys along a narrow path that led toward the cemetery gates, her hand clutching the smallest one's shoulder. Her posture was defensive, protective, the instinctive stance of someone who'd learned to anticipate threats. "Wait, please," Thomas called, his voice cracking on the second word. The sound startled a mourning dove from a nearby cypress tree, its wings flapping loudly in the stillness. The woman froze but didn't turn immediately. Thomas watched her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath before she slowly pivoted to face him, positioning herself between him and the children like a human shield. Up close, Thomas could see her more clearly. Mid-30s perhaps, though hardship had aged her prematurely. Her coat was clean but worn thin at the elbows, her jeans faded from countless washes. "I just want to talk," Thomas said, stopping several yards away, conscious that his height and expensive clothes might appear intimidating. The woman's eyes, dark and wary, assessed him with the practiced wariness of someone who'd learned to read threats quickly. "There's nothing to talk about," she said, her voice soft but firm. Behind her, the three boys huddled together, identical in their matching dark hair and slender builds, though their faces each held subtle differences in expression. Thomas noticed a metal toy car clutched in the hand of the middle child, an old-fashioned replica of a 1957 Chevy, its red paint chipped and worn. His breath caught. It was identical to the model in the photograph he kept in his desk drawer, Alex standing proudly beside his restored classic car, the same model he'd collected in miniature since childhood. "That car," Thomas said, nodding toward the toy. "Where did you get it?" The woman tensed further, her hand tightening on the shoulder of the smallest boy. "It's just a toy," she said, but something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps fear, betrayed her casual dismissal. "It's the same model my son collected," Thomas persisted, taking another step closer. "Alexander loved that car." At the mention of his son's name, the woman's composure faltered momentarily. Her eyes widened, and her lips parted as if to speak, before pressing into a thin line of determination. The smallest boy, the one who had called out Grandpa, tugged at her sleeve. "Maeve, can we tell him?" The boy whispered, loud enough for Thomas to hear. Maeve. The name registered in Thomas's mind, setting off a distant alarm bell that he couldn't quite place. Had Alex mentioned a Maeve? Had he seen the name somewhere in his son's belongings? "Not now, Eddie," Maeve murmured, gently but firmly silencing the child. An elderly man walking with a cane passed nearby, his curious gaze lingering on the tableau they created, the polished executive facing the threadbare woman and three children. "They're here every week," the old man commented to no one in particular as he shuffled past. "Rain or shine, those kids bring flowers." Thomas's mind raced. Every week? To whose grave? The plot they had been standing near wasn't Alex's. "Look, Mr. Lewin," Maeve said, shocking Thomas with the use of his name. "This isn't the place. These boys have already been through enough." The three children watched him with identical expressions of solemn curiosity. Up close, Thomas could see what he hadn't noticed from a distance, their eyes. All three had the same striking blue shade that had marked the Lewin family for generations. Alex's eyes, his own father's eyes, his eyes. A cold weight settled in Thomas's stomach. "How do you know who I am?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. Maeve hesitated, glancing at the children, then back at Thomas. "Everyone in Pine Hollow knows the Lewin family," she said carefully. "Your pharmaceutical company employs half the town." It was a plausible explanation, but the tension in her voice suggested there was more. Thomas was accustomed to reading people across negotiation tables, detecting the slight inflections that revealed hidden agendas, the micro-expressions that betrayed deception. Maeve was holding back something significant. "Why did he call me Grandpa?" Thomas asked directly, nodding toward Eddie. A gust of wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the leaves overhead and carrying whispered fragments of conversation from distant mourners. For a moment, nobody spoke. "Children say things," Maeve replied finally. "Eddie has an active imagination." Thomas was about to press further when one of the other boys, taller than Eddie by half an inch with a small scar above his right eyebrow, whispered something that sounded like Jason, Mikey, Eddie, counting off names that Thomas had never heard. "We need to go," Maeve said firmly, gathering the children closer. "I'm sorry about your son, Mr. Lewin, truly." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. Not the generic sympathy of a stranger, but something deeper, more personal. Before Thomas could respond, she was moving again, ushering the triplets toward the wrought iron gates of the cemetery. Thomas watched them go, rooted to the spot by the weight of questions multiplying in his mind. They had nearly reached the exit when Eddie broke free from Maeve's grasp and ran back a few steps. "He told us stories about you," the boy called, his small voice carrying across the distance. "About the stars and the—" "Eddie!" Maeve's sharp call cut him off. The boy turned reluctantly and ran back to her side. Thomas stood alone among the gravestones, the morning sun now fully risen, casting long shadows across the manicured grass. He slowly made his way back to his car, his mind replaying every detail of the encounter. The toy car, the familiar blue eyes, the weekly visits, the names whispered. And most disturbing of all, the claim that Alex had told stories about him. As he reached his Mercedes, Thomas opened the trunk once more. The wooden toy box sat where he'd left it, its contents suddenly imbued with new significance. Not just relics of a lost son, but possibly connections to a life Alex had kept hidden from him. Something had changed. The grief that had defined him for 2 years was now tangled with another emotion, a desperate, clawing need to understand what he had missed. Who were those boys? What was their connection to Alex? And why had his son never spoken of them? Thomas closed the trunk with deliberate gentleness, though what he really wanted was to slam it shut, to release some fraction of the turmoil building inside him. Instead, he did what he had always done with uncomfortable emotions: contained them, compartmentalized them, channeled them into action. He slid behind the wheel, the leather seat still warm, and pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls from the office, a reminder of the board meeting at 11. For the first time in his career, Thomas found himself completely indifferent to corporate obligations. Instead, he typed Maeve into his contacts search, holding his breath as the phone processed the request. No matches. Of course not. Why would there be? Thomas started the engine, its purr incongruously soothing against the chaos of his thoughts. As he pulled away from the cemetery, his gaze drifted to the rearview mirror, where he caught a final glimpse of Maeve and the 3 boys waiting at a bus stop on the main road, their small figures huddled together against the morning chill. Thomas sat in his idling Mercedes at the corner of Pine Street and Magnolia Avenue, watching the number 16 bus pull up to the curb. His fingers drummed against the leather steering wheel, an unconscious rhythm that matched his racing heartbeat. Through the windshield, he observed Maeve helping the 3 boys board the bus, her movements efficient but gentle, like someone accustomed to shepherding multiple children through daily routines. The smallest boy, Eddie, glanced back before climbing the steps, his blue eyes scanning the street as if sensing Thomas's presence. The CEO slouched lower in his seat, feeling absurdly like a character in one of those detective shows Alex had loved watching. The thought of his son sent a familiar pang through his chest, but now it came with something new, a burning curiosity about connections he'd never suspected. The bus pulled away from the curb with a diesel rumble, and Thomas eased his car into traffic 3 vehicles behind it. The digital clock on his dashboard read 8:37 a.m. His executive assistant would be frantically trying to reach him by now. The board meeting at 11 would include discussions about the Meridian acquisition, a deal he'd personally championed for months. Yet here he was, following a public bus through the streets of Pine Hollow, chasing ghosts and whispered possibilities. Through the bus's rear window, Thomas could make out the silhouettes of the 3 boys, their heads clustered together as they talked animatedly. Even from a distance, the similarity in their profiles was unmistakable. The same straight nose, the same curve of the jaw that Thomas recognized from family photographs spanning generations of Lewins. The bus made 4 stops before Maeve and the boys disembarked at the corner of Westfield and Harper, in the modest east side of town. Thomas parked half a block away and watched as they entered a small diner called Sally's Breakfast and Lunch, its neon sign flickering erratically in the morning light. After counting to 60, a trick he'd learned in high-stakes negotiations to calm his thoughts, Thomas followed. A bell jingled cheerfully as he pushed open the door, the warm aroma of coffee and bacon enveloping him immediately. The diner was half full, mostly blue-collar workers grabbing breakfast before shifts. Several heads turned at his entrance, recognition flashing across a few faces. The Lewin name carried weight in Pine Hollow. He slid into a corner booth that offered a diagonal view of Maeve and the boys, partially obscured by a plastic fern. A waitress approached immediately, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized him. "Just coffee, Black," Thomas murmured, keeping his voice low. From his vantage point, he could see the boys sharing a plate of pancakes, their forks darting in with the competitive energy of siblings. Maeve sipped what appeared to be plain hot water with lemon, her eyes continuously scanning the diner, the habitual vigilance of someone accustomed to watching for threats. The triplets, if that's what they were, spoke with the intimate language of children who had shared experiences beyond their years. Their voices carried across the diner in fragments. "But Jason always gets the biggest piece. Mikey, you promised you wouldn't. Eddie, remember what she said about—" Thomas strained to catch more, but the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation obscured their words. He noticed that despite their identical features, each boy had distinct mannerisms. The one called Jason sat straighter, his movements precise and measured. Mikey gestured expansively when he spoke, nearly knocking over a glass of orange juice. And Eddie, the one who had called out to him, seemed more watchful, his eyes frequently drifting toward the diner's entrance. Just like Alex had been as a child, Thomas realized with a jolt. Always aware of exits and entrances, always the first to notice someone new in a room. The waitress returned with his coffee, breaking his concentration. "Anything else, mister?" "Lewin?" she asked, the name spoken with the deferent small-town employees reserved for their largest employer. Before he could answer, a sudden burst of laughter erupted from the boys' table. Genuine, uninhibited joy that caused several diners to smile reflexively. The sound hit Thomas like a physical blow. When was the last time he had heard children laugh? Had he ever really listened when Alex laughed as a child? In that moment of distraction, Maeve looked up, and their eyes met across the diner. Recognition flashed across her face, followed immediately by alarm. She leaned forward, whispering urgently to the boys, who immediately fell silent. Within seconds, she was gathering their things, a worn backpack, 3 identical blue jackets, and ushering them toward the door. Thomas left a $20 bill on the table and followed, abandoning his untouched coffee. Outside, the morning had warmed slightly, the sun burning away the last wisps of fog from the streets. He spotted Maeve and the boys half a block ahead, moving quickly toward the bus stop. "Maeve!" he called, his voice carrying in the quiet street. She froze momentarily before turning, positioning herself between Thomas and the children with the same protective stance she'd adopted at the cemetery. The boys peered around her, their identical blue eyes wide with curiosity and something else. Hope, perhaps. "You're following us," Maeve stated flatly as Thomas approached. It wasn't a question. "I need to understand," Thomas replied, stopping a respectful distance away. "Those boys are none of your concern," she interrupted, her voice low but firm. "Whatever you think you know." "I don't know anything," Thomas admitted, spreading his hands in a gesture of surrender. "That's the problem. But I think you do. I think you know something about my son that I don't." At the mention of Alex, something flickered across Maeve's face, a complex emotion Thomas couldn't quite decipher. Grief, perhaps, or guilt. "Mr. Lewin," she said carefully, "I understand you're looking for answers, but these children have been through enough trauma." "Please," Thomas said, the word foreign on his lips. CEOs rarely begged. "Just tell me how my son knew you. Tell me why that boy called me Grandpa." Eddie stepped forward slightly, only to be gently pulled back by Maeve. "I recognize you from the videos," the boy said before she could stop him. "Alex showed us." Thomas's heart skipped painfully. "Videos?" Maeve sighed, a sound of resignation. "Mr. Lewin, this isn't the place. People are watching." She was right. Several passers-by had slowed their pace, eyeing the unusual tableau of the town's wealthiest resident conversing with a clearly struggling woman and 3 children on a street corner. Then where? When? Thomas pressed, unwilling to let this thread slip away. Maeve hesitated, glancing at her watch. A cheap digital model with a cracked face. "I have to get the boys to their appointment," she said. "And then I start my shift at Mercy Hospital at noon." Thomas pulled out his business card, cream-colored cardstock with raised lettering, a symbol of corporate power that suddenly seemed meaningless. He flipped it over and scribbled his personal cell number on the back. "Please," he said again, holding out the card. "Call me when you can talk." Maeve stared at the card for a long moment before taking it, her fingers careful not to touch his. "I can't promise anything," she said quietly. As she turned to leave, the middle boy, Mikey, spoke up suddenly. "Are you really a CEO?" he asked, his voice bright with curiosity. "Alex said you run the biggest company in town and that you can see the whole city from your office windows." Thomas blinked, momentarily speechless. Alex had talked about him, had described his office. The revelation was both heartwarming and painful. His son had shared details of his life with these children, yet Thomas knew nothing of them in return. "Yes," he managed finally. "Yes, I am." "Cool," Mikey replied simply. The approaching rumble of the bus ended their conversation. As Maeve herded the boys toward the curb, Thomas noticed something dangling from Eddie's backpack, a laminated ID badge with a faded photograph. Though he couldn't make out the details, the familiar blue and green border of a Lewin Pharma employee credential was unmistakable. The bus doors opened with a hydraulic hiss, and the boys clambered aboard. Maeve followed, pausing briefly at the top step to look back at Thomas. Something in her expression had softened slightly. Not quite trust, but perhaps a recognition of the shared humanity beneath their vastly different circumstances. As the bus pulled away, Thomas stood motionless on the sidewalk, his mind racing through possibilities. The badge, the familiar eyes, the knowledge of his office, the toy car identical to Alex's prized model. Each piece seemed significant, yet they refused to form a coherent picture. For the first time in years, Thomas Lewin was confronted with a puzzle he couldn't immediately solve. And for the first time since receiving the call about Alex's accident, he felt something other than grief or corporate ambition driving him forward. A desperate need to understand what part of his son's life had remained hidden from him, and why. He reached for his phone, scrolling past multiple missed calls from the office, and dialed a number he hadn't used in over a year. "Barrett Investigations," a gruff voice answered. "Frank speaking." "Frank, it's Thomas Lewin," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "I need your services immediately, and with absolute discretion." Thomas's corner office on the 12th floor of the Lewin Pharma headquarters offered a panoramic view of Pine Hollow, from the dense cluster of downtown buildings to the sprawling residential neighborhoods, and finally to the ribbon of highway that connected their small city to the wider world. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind his back, watching the afternoon sun glint off the windshields of cars in the company parking lot below. Behind him, Frank Barrett shifted in the leather guest chair, the material creaking softly beneath his substantial frame. At 58, the former police detective had the weathered face of a man who had seen too much and the sharp eyes of someone who missed nothing. His rumpled suit contrasted sharply with Thomas's tailored perfection. "You understand what I'm asking?" Thomas said without turning from the window. "You want me to investigate a possible connection between your late son and a woman named Maeve, no last name provided, and 3 children who may or may not be related to him," Frank summarized, his gravelly voice neutral, "without alerting the press, the board, or anyone else." Thomas turned, fixing the investigator with the penetrating stare that had intimidated countless business rivals. "Absolute discretion, Frank. The quarterly report is due next week and the Meridian acquisition is in its final stages. If there's even a whisper of irregularity in my personal affairs—" "I get it," Frank interrupted, unintimidated. "I've worked for you before, remember? But you should know that secrets have a way of surfacing, especially in a town this size." Thomas returned to his desk, sinking into his ergonomic chair with practiced grace. On his computer monitor, 27 unread emails glowed accusingly, each marked with a red exclamation point of urgency. He ignored them, focusing instead on the framed photograph next to his keyboard. Alex at his college graduation, looking uncomfortable in his cap and gown, but smiling nonetheless. "What do you know about this Maeve so far?" Frank asked, pulling out a small notepad. "Almost nothing," Thomas admitted, the words bitter on his tongue. He was unaccustomed to operating with so little information. "She works at Mercy Hospital. The boys, apparently triplets, are named Jason, Mikey, and Eddie. They visit the cemetery weekly, though not my son's grave." Frank scribbled notes, his expression thoughtful. "And you saw what appeared to be a Lewin Pharma ID badge? On one of the boys' backpacks, yes. Faded, possibly old. Your son never worked here, though, did he?" Thomas shook his head. Alex was adamant about forging his own path. The memory still carried a sting of disappointment. He worked various jobs after college: environmental activism, some tech startup that failed, then something with a nonprofit. We didn't discuss his career much during our last few years. The admission hung in the air between them, laden with regret. Frank tactfully moved on. "What makes you think there's a connection beyond coincidence? Lots of kids have blue eyes. Lots of people know the town's biggest employer." Thomas leaned forward, his voice dropping despite the privacy of his office. "One of them called me Grandpa, Frank. Unprompted. And they had a toy car, the exact model Alex collected." Frank raised an eyebrow but remained professional. "I'll need photographs of your son, details of his last known residence, employment history, bank records if possible, and anything you can remember about his friends, relationships." The intercom on Thomas's desk buzzed sharply, cutting off Frank's words. Thomas suppressed a flicker of irritation as he pressed the button. "I said no interruptions, Diane." His executive assistant's voice was apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, sir, but Ms. Carraway is here. She says it's urgent and won't take no for an answer." Thomas closed his eyes briefly. Audrey Carraway, board member, major shareholder, and his late wife's cousin. The last person he wanted to see right now. "Tell her I'm in a meeting." "I did, sir," she said, and I quote, "Tell Thomas I don't care if he's meeting with the president. He owes me an explanation for missing this morning's critical vote." Frank gathered his notebook and stood. "I can come back later." "No," Thomas said sharply, then modulated his tone. "No, this won't take long. Wait in the conference room across the hall. Diane will bring you coffee." As Frank slipped out one door, Audrey Carraway swept in through another, tall, elegant, and radiating the particular displeasure of old money thwarted. Her charcoal suit was as expensive as Thomas's, her silver hair cut in a severe bob that emphasized her angular features. "Thomas," she began without preamble, "the board needed your vote on the Taiwanese production facility this morning. Your absence gave Harrison the opening he needed to push for a delay." Thomas arranged his features into a mask of corporate contrition. "A personal matter came up unexpectedly. I apologize for the inconvenience." Audrey's eyes narrowed, bright and calculating behind designer frames. "Personal matter? You haven't had a personal matter in 2 years, not since—" She stopped, something like genuine concern flickering across her face. "Is it about Alex? Has something happened?" The question caught Thomas off guard. Despite their occasionally adversarial relationship on the board, Audrey had been genuinely fond of Alex, had even maintained contact with him during the years when Thomas and his son barely spoke. "Why would you ask that?" he countered, his tone sharper than intended. Audrey studied him for a moment before taking a seat without invitation. "Because I saw you this morning, Thomas, at Sally's diner of all places, following that woman and those children like some kind of amateur detective. It doesn't take a genius to connect the dots." Thomas felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "You were at the diner? Book club breakfast in the back room," she said with a dismissive wave. "But that's not important. What matters is that whatever you're doing could affect Lewin Pharma, which means it affects all of us. So either tell me what's going on, or I'll call an emergency board meeting citing concerns about your focus and judgment." It wasn't an idle threat. Though Thomas maintained majority control, Audrey had enough influence to make things difficult, especially with the Meridian deal in its delicate final stage. "I'm handling it," he said firmly. "Handling what exactly?" Her voice softened slightly. "Thomas, if this is about Alex, about finding some way to, I don't know, preserve his memory or make amends, I understand. But doing it publicly, in a town where everyone knows who you are—" "I said I'm handling it," Thomas repeated, standing to signal the end of the conversation. "The vote can be rescheduled. Harrison's concerns about the Taiwan facility are legitimate and deserve consideration." Audrey rose as well, smoothing her already immaculate suit. "Just be careful," she said, her tone uncharacteristically gentle. "People have been talking since the funeral about how you've changed. Withdrawn. Focused only on work. If they see you behaving erratically now, following strangers around town, is that concern for me or for the company's stock price?" A flicker of hurt crossed her face. "Believe it or not, Thomas, some of us actually cared about both you and Alex. Just because you shut everyone out after he died doesn't mean we stopped caring." She moved toward the door, but paused with her hand on the handle. "Whatever you're looking for, I hope you find it. But remember that you have responsibilities to more than just your conscience." The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt like an accusation. Thomas stood motionless, her words echoing in his mind. Had he changed that much? Had he truly shut out everyone who cared? He thought of the 3 boys at the cemetery, their faces so hauntingly familiar. Whatever connection they had to Alex, he needed to understand it, not just for himself, but because he sensed it was something his son would have wanted him to know. Thomas gathered several files from his desk drawer: Alex's last birthday card, insurance documents, the police report from the accident, and headed for the conference room where Frank waited. As he crossed his office, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He stopped, his pulse quickening as he read the message. "Fair tonight at Riverfront Park, 7 p.m. If you want answers, come alone. M." Thomas stared at the screen, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension washing over him. Answers. After 2 years of questions he hadn't even known to ask, the possibility of understanding what had happened Who Alex had really been was simultaneously tantalizing and terrifying. He tucked his phone away and continued to the conference room, his mind already calculating how quickly he could conclude his meeting with Frank and what excuse he would give for leaving the office early. Outside his window, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, casting long shadows across Pine Hollow. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were an omen of sorts, that whatever he discovered tonight at the fair would forever change not just his understanding of his son, but of himself as well. The annual Pine Hollow Harvest Fair transformed Riverfront Park into a kaleidoscope of lights, sounds, and scents that assaulted Thomas's senses the moment he stepped through the entrance arch. Strings of multicolored bulbs crisscrossed overhead, swaying gently in the evening breeze. The competing aromas of funnel cake, roasted corn, and caramel apples mingled in the cool autumn air, while carnival barkers called out enticements to passers-by. Thomas felt immediately conspicuous in his tailored overcoat and leather shoes, corporate armor in a sea of denim and flannel. He had come directly from the office, pausing only long enough to leave his tie in the car. All afternoon, he'd been distracted during meetings, his mind continuously drifting to the mysterious text and what revelations might await him. Children darted past him, laughing and sticky-fingered, their parents calling after them with fond exasperation. Families moved in cohesive units, teenagers clustered in self-conscious groups, couples walked hand in hand, all reminders of a normal life that had always seemed secondary to Thomas's ambitions. Until now. He checked his watch, 6:52 p.m., and scanned the crowd for any sign of Maeve or the boys. The fair was busier than he'd expected for a weeknight, the economic struggles of Pine Hollow temporarily forgotten in the allure of affordable entertainment. Many of these people, he realized, probably worked for him directly or indirectly, their livelihoods dependent on decisions he made in that corner office, with its panoramic view. "Mr. Lewin?" The voice came from behind him, not Maeve's, but familiar nonetheless. Thomas turned to find a middle-aged woman with faded blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore the light blue scrubs of Mercy Hospital's nursing staff, a cardigan thrown over them against the evening chill. "Nancy Porter," she said, offering her hand. "I work with Maeve at the hospital. She asked me to find you." Thomas shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct gaze of someone accustomed to managing crises. "Where is she?" "By the carousel. She thought it would be better if I approached you first, less conspicuous." Nancy's eyes swept over his expensive coat and shoes. "Though you're not exactly blending in." There was no judgment in her tone, just pragmatic observation. She gestured for him to follow and led him through the crowd, navigating the fairground with the efficiency of a longtime resident. "How long have you known Maeve?" Thomas asked, falling into step beside her. Nancy glanced at him sideways. "Long enough to know she's one of the strongest people I've ever met, and that she's been through more than anyone should have to endure. And the boys? Those children are everything to her," Nancy said simply. "She'd do anything to protect them." "From what?" Thomas pressed. "From who?" Nancy stopped walking, turning to face him directly. The flashing lights from a nearby ring toss game illuminated her face in alternating colors, but couldn't disguise the seriousness of her expression. "Mr. Lewin, I'm only involved because Maeve trusts me and because I knew your son. Alex was a good man, better than most people in this town ever realized. Whatever you learn tonight, remember that." Before Thomas could respond, they rounded a corner and the carousel came into view. A vintage masterpiece of carved horses and mythical creatures rising and falling to the tinny melody of an antique organ. Seated on a bench facing the ride were Maeve and the three boys, each clutching cotton candy on paper cones. Eddie spotted him first, tugging on Maeve's sleeve and pointing. Nancy touched Thomas's arm lightly. "Tread carefully," she said quietly. "There's more at stake here than you know." With a nod to Maeve, she disappeared back into the crowd. Thomas approached slowly, conscious of presenting himself as non-threatening. Up close, in the carnival lights, Maeve looked even more exhausted than she had that morning, dark circles prominent beneath her eyes. She wore a worn denim jacket over her hospital scrubs, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "You came," she said, neither pleased nor displeased, merely stating a fact. "You offered answers," Thomas replied, remaining standing as there was no invitation to sit. Maeve nodded to the boys. "Go ride the carousel once more. Stay where I can see you." The triplets hesitated, looking between the adults with identical expressions of curiosity and concern. "Go," Maeve repeated gently. "Mr. Lewin and I need to talk." As the boys ran toward the carousel, their enthusiasm momentarily overriding their caution, Thomas noticed their clothes, clean but visibly worn, patched in places, the kind of careful mending done by someone making limited resources stretch as far as possible. "They look like him," Thomas said quietly. Maeve's gaze followed the boys as they climbed onto the carousel, each selecting a different carved animal, a dragon, a seahorse, a traditional palomino. "Yes," she acknowledged. "They do." "Are they?" Thomas began, but found himself unable to complete the question, the implications too enormous to voice. "Alex's," Maeve finished for him, her expression unreadable in the shifting carnival lights. "No, not biologically, but in every way that matters, yes, they were his." The past tense hit Thomas like a physical blow. He sank onto the bench beside her, the distance between them both physical and vast. "I don't understand," he said, watching as the carousel began to turn, carrying the boys in circles to the mechanical melody. Eddie waved from atop the dragon with each rotation, his smile visible even from a distance. Maeve was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the children. 2 years and 3 months ago," she finally said. "I was working the night shift in the emergency room when they brought them in. 3 little boys, 5 years old, severely malnourished, showing signs of neglect and abuse." The clinical description couldn't disguise the emotion in her voice, a controlled fury beneath the professional detachment. They had been found in an abandoned house on the edge of town. Police suspected they had been part of a trafficking operation. No identification, no records, nothing but 3 terrified children who wouldn't speak to anyone. Thomas listened, his breath catching at the horror of it. "And Alex? How was he involved?" A ghost of a smile touched Maeve's lips. "Alex volunteered at the hospital twice a week, reading to patients, helping with the therapy dog program. He had a way with the children. They trusted him when they wouldn't trust anyone else, especially these 3. The carousel slowed, the music winding down as the ride came to an end. The boys immediately ran to another attraction, a game where they threw softballs at milk bottles. He started spending more time with them, bringing them toys, books. "That car your son gave to Mikey, it was the first gift any of them had ever received. They treasured it." Maeve paused, swallowing hard. "When the state wanted to separate them, place them in different foster homes, Alex was devastated. He fought it, used his own money to hire a lawyer specializing in child welfare cases." Thomas felt a sharp pang of dissonance. This version of his son, passionate advocate, selfless volunteer, seemed at odds with the distant young man who had rebuffed his attempts at connection in those final years. Why didn't he tell me any of this? The question emerged more vulnerable than Thomas had intended. Maeve's expression softened slightly. He wanted to, especially toward the end. "The end," Thomas repeated, the familiar grief settling back into his chest. "You mean before the accident?" Something flickered across Maeve's face. Hesitation, perhaps even fear. "Mr. Lewin, there's something you need to understand about what happened to Alex. It wasn't—" She stopped abruptly as a commotion erupted at the ball toss booth. Thomas looked over to see a stocky man in a security uniform speaking to the triplets, his posture aggressive despite their small size. The boys backed away, Eddie clutching Mikey's arm, Jason standing slightly in front of both. Maeve was on her feet instantly, moving toward them with the speed and focus of someone accustomed to emergency situations. Thomas followed, alarmed by the sudden tension radiating from her. "Is there a problem?" Maeve asked as they reached the booth, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. The security guard, Reynolds embroidered on his uniform, turned with a scowl. "These kids were hanging around without paying. Carnival policy is clear. You pay to play." "We were just looking," Jason said, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. "We didn't touch anything." Reynolds snorted. "Sure, kid. That's what all you little thieves say." Thomas stepped forward, positioning himself beside Maeve. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," he said, using the same authoritative tone that commanded boardrooms. "The boys are with me." The security guard's eyes widened slightly as he recognized Thomas. "Mr. Lewin, sir. I didn't realize—" "No harm done," Thomas interrupted, extracting a $50 bill from his wallet and handing it to the booth operator. "This should cover their games, I believe." The tension dissipated as quickly as it had formed. Reynolds mumbled an apology and moved away, but not before casting a final suspicious glance at the boys. Maeve's relief was palpable, though she maintained her protective stance. "Thank you," she said quietly to Thomas. "Can we play now?" Mikey asked, his earlier fear already fading into excitement at the prospect of the game. Thomas nodded, something warm and unfamiliar expanding in his chest as he watched them eagerly accept the softballs from the booth operator. "We'll continue our conversation," he said to Maeve. "There's still so much I need to know." Maeve's phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked it, her expression immediately tightening. "I have to go," she said, urgency threading through her voice. "Emergency shift at the hospital, multi-car accident on the highway." "But," Thomas began to protest. "I can't say no to an emergency call," Maeve cut him off, already gathering the boys. "Nancy will take them to her house until my shift ends." Thomas watched as she quickly explained the situation to the disappointed children, her manner both firm and gentle. Despite their protests, the boys nodded, understanding, accustomed to the unpredictable demands of their guardian's work. As Nancy appeared to collect them, Maeve turned back to Thomas, her expression conflicted. "There's a manila envelope behind the third ceramic frog in the garden section of Hillside Nursery," she said in a low voice. "It has photographs, documents, things Alex wanted you to have eventually." Before Thomas could process this bizarre statement, she was gone, moving quickly through the crowd toward the exit, leaving him standing amid the flashing lights and carnival music with more questions than answers. Hillside Nursery was eerily quiet at 9:30 in the evening, its sprawling grounds illuminated only by security lights that cast long shadows among the displays of plants and garden ornaments. Thomas stood at the locked gate, his breath forming small clouds in the chill night air, the weight of doubt pressing against his chest. Was he really going to break into a local business based on cryptic instructions from a woman he barely knew? The rational corporate part of his mind, the part that had built Lewin Pharma into an industry powerhouse, screamed that this was madness. Yet something deeper, something connected to the hollow ache he'd carried since Alex's death, propelled him forward. He shrugged off his expensive overcoat, draping it over the decorative spikes atop the iron fence to protect himself as he climbed. His leather shoes slipped on the metal as he hauled himself upward, muscles protesting movements they hadn't made in decades. Thomas Lewin, respected CEO and Pine Hollow's most prominent citizen, was scaling a fence like a common trespasser. The absurdity of it struck him as he dropped heavily to the ground on the other side, barely maintaining his balance. Moving cautiously through the shadows, Thomas navigated between displays of ornamental shrubs and seasonal flowers, following signs toward the garden decoration section. Security cameras were visible at the main building, but the outer displays seemed unwatched. Small mercies for a man unaccustomed to skulking. The garden gnome section emerged before him, rows of ceramic figures arranged by size and theme. Thomas scanned frantically for frogs, his heart pounding in his ears. Who would think to hide sensitive documents behind a ceramic frog in a garden center? It seemed like something from a bad spy movie, not real life. Yet there they were, a collection of frogs in various poses, sitting on lily pads, playing musical instruments, holding welcome signs. Thomas counted to the third one, a particularly portly frog wearing a waistcoat and spectacles. With a quick glance over his shoulder, he reached behind the heavy ornament and felt something solid. The manila envelope was weatherproof, sealed with clear packing tape, and bore no external markings. Thomas tucked it inside his suit jacket just as a beam of light swept across the display area. Instinctively, he dropped to a crouch behind a large planter. "Hello? Anyone there?" A deep voice called from the direction of the main building. Thomas remained perfectly still, scarcely daring to breathe. The security guard's flashlight beam passed over his hiding place once more, before retreating. After counting to 100, Thomas crept back to the fence, finding a spot where overhanging tree branches provided both cover and assistance for his climb. Back in his car, parked discreetly on a side street, Thomas's hands trembled as he peeled back the tape on the envelope. The CEO, who routinely made multi-million-dollar decisions without hesitation, was now nervous about opening a package from his dead son. The irony wasn't lost on him. Inside the envelope were several items: a USB drive, a folded sheet of paper, and photographs. A dozen or so, paper clipped together. Thomas turned on the interior light and lifted the photos. The first showed Alex, smiling, healthier than Thomas remembered from their last meeting. kneeling beside the three boys. They were younger in the image, perhaps 5 or 6, their matching blue eyes wide with childhood wonder as they examined what appeared to be a model train set. The casual intimacy of the scene struck Thomas like a physical blow. This was a side of his son he had never witnessed. Patient, nurturing, genuinely happy. The second photo showed Alex and Maeve standing close together in what looked like a hospital corridor, both wearing volunteer badges. Not romantically involved, their body language suggested colleagues, perhaps friends, but comfortable in each other's presence. Thomas studied his son's face, searching for clues about this life he'd known nothing about. More photos followed. Alex helping the boys build a birdhouse, all 5 of them at what appeared to be a small birthday celebration. Alex reading to the children in a hospital room. Each image revealed a rich tapestry of connections and moments that had existed parallel to Thomas's narrow understanding of his son's life. The final photograph, however, caused Thomas's breath to catch painfully in his throat. It showed Alex in a hospital bed, noticeably thinner, his complexion pallid. The triplets were arranged carefully beside him, their small faces solemn as they posed for the camera. In the corner of the image was a timestamp, 3 days before the accident that had supposedly taken Alex's life. With unsteady fingers, Thomas unfolded the paper, a photocopy of a medical form. At the top, Mercy Hospital bone marrow donation consent. The donor's name was clearly visible, Alexander James Lewin. The recipient's information was partially redacted, but 3 patient numbers were listed. At the bottom of the form was Alex's signature, dated just 1 week before his death. Thomas stared at the document, his mind struggling to connect these new pieces with what he thought he had known. Alex had been a bone marrow donor? For whom? The triplets? Why would they have needed bone marrow transplants? The USB drive might hold answers, but Thomas couldn't access it from his car. He started the engine, his mind already mapping the quickest route home, where his personal laptop waited, secure from the corporate networks and watchful eyes of Lewin Pharma. As he pulled away from the curb, Thomas failed to notice the dark sedan parked half a block behind him, or the way it eased into traffic, maintaining a careful distance as it followed. 20 minutes later, Thomas hurried through his front door, bypassing the security system with practiced movements. The echoing emptiness of his modernist mansion, all glass, steel, and minimalist design, had never bothered him before. Tonight, however, the silence felt oppressive, a reminder of how isolated he had become. In his home office, Thomas booted up his personal laptop, inserting the USB drive with hands that still weren't quite steady. A single video file appeared, labeled simply, "For Dad." The timestamp matched the day before Alex's supposed accident. Thomas hesitated, his finger hovering over the trackpad. Whatever this contained had been important enough for Alex to record, for Maeve to preserve, for both to ensure it would eventually reach him. Once he pressed play, there would be no returning to the comforting numbness of his grief. Drawing a deep breath, Thomas clicked the file. Alex's face filled the screen, gaunt, pale, but with eyes that still held the intensity Thomas remembered. He was propped up in what appeared to be a hospital bed, the generic artwork on the wall behind him suggesting a private room. "Dad?" Alex began, his voice raspier than Thomas remembered. "If you're watching this, then things have gone. Not according to plan." A weak smile flickered across his face. "I wanted to tell you everything in person, but Maeve thinks I should make this, just in case. She's usually right about these things." Thomas leaned closer to the screen, drinking in the sight of his son speaking directly to him, something that had seemed impossible for 2 years. "I need to start by saying I'm sorry," Alex continued. "Sorry for the distance between us these past few years. Sorry for not being the son you wanted. And sorry that you're finding out like this about Jason, Mikey, and Eddie." Alex shifted slightly, wincing as if in pain. "Those boys, they're special, Dad. Not just because they've survived hell, but because of what they represent. A second chance, maybe. For all of us." He paused, seeming to gather strength. "When Mercy Hospital contacted me about being a bone marrow match, I thought it was a mistake. The odds of matching 3 unrelated children were astronomical. But then the genetic testing showed something nobody expected." Alex's eyes met the camera directly. "They're Lewins, Dad. Somehow, some way. They carry our genetic markers. Distant relatives, maybe, or..." Alex's voice trailed off, replaced by a fit of coughing. When he continued, his voice was weaker. "I don't have time to find all the answers. The transplants took more out of me than I expected, and there are complications. But what matters is that those boys survive. They deserve a chance at life. A real life. Not what was planned for them. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. What had Alex meant by, what was planned for them? There are people who don't want them found, Dad. People who'll go to great lengths to keep their operation quiet. I've documented everything I've discovered and encrypted it on this drive. The password is Mom's birthday, followed by your wedding anniversary. Alex leaned closer to the camera, his expression suddenly urgent. They need protection, Dad. And when the time is right, they need family. Our family. The video ended abruptly, freezing on Alex's face, eyes pleading, hand slightly outstretched toward the camera. Thomas sat in stunned silence, the implications of his son's words washing over him in waves. Not only had Alex known about these children, he had risked and possibly lost his life to save them. And now it seemed that responsibility had passed to Thomas. The sudden, sharp ring of his doorbell shattered the silence, causing Thomas to slam the laptop closed instinctively. He glanced at his watch. 10:43 p.m. No one in his social circle would call unannounced at this hour. Moving cautiously to the security panel in the hallway, Thomas checked the camera feed. Frank Barrett stood at the door, his weathered face grim in the porch light. Thomas released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding and opened the door. "We need to talk," Frank said without preamble. "Something's happened at Mercy Hospital." The emergency room at Mercy Hospital pulsed with controlled chaos. Medical personnel moving with practiced urgency between curtained bays, the sharp antiseptic scent barely masking the underlying notes of blood and fear. Thomas followed Frank through sliding glass doors, his CEO confidence faltering in this unfamiliar territory of trauma and pain. "She's in the break room," Frank murmured, navigating the corridors with the familiarity of someone who had spent years interviewing witnesses and victims in hospital settings. Hospital security called Pine Hollow PD when it happened. "My old partner phoned me." "When what happened?" Thomas asked, his voice tight with apprehension. The investigator had been frustratingly vague during the drive, saying only that there had been an incident involving Maeve. Frank's expression darkened. "Someone tried to access the pediatric records room while she was on shift. When she confronted them, things got physical." A chill ran down Thomas's spine, Alex's warning suddenly echoing in his mind. There are people who don't want them found. The mysterious they from the video had become all too real. The staff break room was small and utilitarian. Vinyl chairs, laminate tables, vending machines humming in the corner. Maeve sat alone, an ice pack pressed to her right temple. Her scrubs were rumpled, a spray of what looked like blood staining the front. When she looked up at their entrance, Thomas saw that her left eye was swelling shut, the skin around it already darkening to an angry purple. "You shouldn't be here," she said immediately, her voice hoarse but steady. "Either of you." Thomas moved forward, rage building at the sight of her injuries. "Who did this to you?" Maeve adjusted the ice pack, wincing slightly. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that they're escalating. They know I'm talking to you." Her gaze shifted to Frank, suspicion evident. "Who's this?" "Frank Barrett," Thomas said. "Private investigator. I hired him to help me understand what's happening." A ghost of a smile touched Maeve's swollen lips. "Throwing money at the problem? Very Lewin of you." The attempt at humor fell flat, undermined by the fear visible in her eyes. Frank pulled up a chair, positioning himself to see both the room's entrance and the small window overlooking the parking lot. "Ms. Maeve," he began, "I need you to tell us exactly what happened, and who we're dealing with." Maeve lowered the ice pack, revealing the full extent of the bruising. Thomas fought to control his expression, to hide his shock at the violence that had been done to her. "I was logging patient charts when I noticed someone in the records room," she said, her words carefully measured. "Access is restricted, especially to pediatric files. When I asked for identification, She paused, swallowing. "He slammed me against the filing cabinet and said to tell Lewin that some secrets should stay buried with his son." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. "He mentioned me. By name?" Maeve nodded. "He knew who you were, and about Alex." "Description?" Frank asked, notebook already in hand. "Professional, mid-40s, short brown hair, expensive watch. Could have been a doctor or administrator if you didn't look closely. But his hands," Maeve's voice faltered. "They weren't a doctor's hands, they were a fighter's hands," Frank finished for her, writing rapidly. calloused knuckles, maybe scars? Yes. Maeve's confirmation was barely audible. Thomas paced the small room, struggling to process this escalation. The boys. Where are they now? Still with Nancy, Maeve said. But they can't stay there. Not after this. Fear crept into her voice for the first time. These people, they have resources, connections. 2 years ago, they made Alex's death look like an accident. If they're moving openly now, Alex's death wasn't an accident? Thomas stopped pacing, the confirmation of his growing suspicion hitting him like a physical blow. You're saying he was murdered? Maeve met his gaze directly, her unbruised eye glistening with unshed tears. Not immediately. The transplant procedure weakened him significantly. He knew the risks. Giving marrow to 3 recipients in succession was dangerous. But when complications developed, certain treatments were delayed. The implication hung in the air between them, monstrous in its calculated cruelty. Someone had ensured that Alex wouldn't recover, wouldn't be able to protect the children or reveal what he had discovered. Frank cleared his throat. We need to move you and the boys to a secure location. I have contacts. No, Thomas interrupted, decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. They come to my house. Tonight. It has a state-of-the-art security system, private road, gated entrance. No one gets in without my authorization. Maeve shook her head. You don't understand what you're getting involved in, Mr. Lewin. Thomas, he corrected automatically. And I think I do. My son died protecting those children. Whatever he discovered, whatever connection they have to our family, it was worth his life. So yes, I understand perfectly. Frank looked between them, his professional detachment wavering. Look, if what you're suggesting is true, if someone deliberately let your son die to cover something up, we're talking about powerful people. The kind with influence in law enforcement, healthcare, maybe government. I'm powerful too, Thomas said quietly, the statement not a boast but a simple acknowledgement. And I have resources they can't match. Maeve studied him, searching for something in his expression. Whatever she saw must have reassured her because she gave a small nod. I need to call Nancy. Prepare the boys. This will frighten them. Thomas's phone buzzed in his pocket, the 3rd time in as many minutes. He pulled it out to decline the call and saw multiple notifications from Lewin Pharma's security system. His blood ran cold as he opened the most recent alert, a video clip from the exterior camera at his office, showing 3 men in tactical gear entering the building using what appeared to be legitimate access cards. They're at Lewin Pharma, he said, showing the screen to Frank. Searching my office, most likely. Frank's expression hardened. This is coordinated. They're moving on multiple fronts. Maeve stood, swaying slightly before steadying herself against the table. We need to go. Now. If they're this bold, they might already be watching Nancy's house. Thomas helped her toward the door, his Harvard Business School training utterly inadequate for the crisis unfolding around him. Years of boardroom negotiations and corporate strategy had never prepared him for physical danger, for people willing to harm others to protect their secrets. Yet beneath his fear, another emotion was taking root, a cold, implacable anger unlike anything he had experienced before. These people had taken his son, had beaten Maeve, and now threatened 3 innocent children. Whatever power they possessed, whatever secrets they protected, Thomas would bring the full weight of his resources and influence against them. As they hurried through the hospital corridors toward the staff exit, Thomas caught sight of a familiar face at the nurse's station. Dr. Malcolm Reed, Lewin Pharma's chief medical consultant and a member of the hospital's board of directors. The doctor's eyes widened in recognition, his hand freezing halfway to his phone. Mal, Thomas acknowledged with a curt nod, not breaking stride. Dr. Reed's gaze shifted to Maeve, noting her injuries, then back to Thomas. Something like resignation passed across his features before he deliberately turned away, pretending not to have seen them. The brief interaction sent another chill through Thomas. How far did this conspiracy extend? Who could they trust? In the hospital parking garage, Frank guided them to his nondescript sedan, rather than Thomas's distinctive Mercedes. We'll take back roads to Nancy's, he said, opening the rear door for Maeve. Then all of you will transfer to my SUV, less recognizable than your car, Thomas, and better for carrying 6 people. As they pulled out of the garage, Thomas glanced back at the hospital's illuminated facade. Lewin Pharma had been a major donor for the new pediatric wing 2 years ago, a project he had approved without much thought beyond the positive publicity. Now he wondered if that decision, like so many others in his carefully controlled life, had been manipulated by unseen hands with unknown agendas. They drove in tense silence for several minutes before Maeve spoke. "There's something you need to understand about the boys," she said, her voice stronger despite her injuries. "They're not just genetically connected to your family. They were created because of it." Thomas turned in his seat to face her. "Created? What do you mean?" Maeve's uninjured eye met his with unflinching directness. "Genetically engineered, using Lewin DNA. Part of an experimental program to develop children with specific enhanced characteristics. The program was called Triad." The revelation hit Thomas with physical force, stealing his breath. That's not possible." "It is when you have unlimited funding and no ethical oversight," Maeve replied. "Alex discovered it when the genetic testing showed familial markers. He kept digging until he found documentation, evidence that Lewin Pharma's experimental genetics division had been involved." Frank kept his eyes on the road, but his knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Your company has a genetics division?" "Officially, no," Thomas admitted, mind racing through corporate structures and subsidiary holdings. "But there's a research partnership with Meridian Bioscience that operates independently. I don't oversee their projects directly." "Convenient," Maeve commented without accusation. Thomas thought of the three identical boys with their striking blue Lewin eyes. Not his grandsons in the traditional sense, but created from his family's genetic material. Perhaps even Alex's. The implications were staggering, ethically monstrous, and yet, those children were real, innocent, worthy of protection, regardless of how they had come into being. "It doesn't matter," he said finally. "Whatever their origin, Alex chose to protect them. So will I." As they turned onto the quiet residential street where Nancy lived, Frank suddenly tensed. Black SUV, 2 houses down. No lights, engine running. Thomas peered through the darkness. Could be anyone. In this neighborhood at this hour with that timing. Frank's voice was grim. "Not likely." Maeve leaned forward, her breathing quick and shallow. "We have to get the boys." "We will," Thomas assured her, already forming a plan. "Frank, drive past. Don't slow down. Circle the block and approach from the rear. There's got to be an alley or service road." As they passed Nancy's modest bungalow, Thomas caught a glimpse of small faces at the window. 3 identical silhouettes backlit by warm interior light, watching for their guardian's return. The sight crystallized his resolve into something unshakable. Whatever came next, he would not fail these children as he had failed his son. The narrow service alley behind Nancy Porter's house was barely wide enough for Frank's sedan, branches from overgrown shrubs scraping against the car's paint as they crept forward with headlights off. Thomas's heart hammered against his ribs, each beat a reminder that 3 children's lives now depended on decisions he would make in the next few minutes. "There," Maeve whispered, pointing to a small gate in the fence surrounding Nancy's backyard. "The kitchen door is just beyond that garden shed." Frank killed the engine, the sudden silence oppressive. "I'll go first," he said, reaching beneath his jacket to reveal a holstered handgun. "If anything happens, get back to the car and go. Don't wait for me." The gravity of their situation struck Thomas anew. This wasn't a high-stakes business negotiation, but a matter of life and death. The corporate armor he'd worn for decades offered no protection here. Frank slipped from the car and moved toward the gate with the practiced stealth of his former profession. Thomas and Maeve followed, her injuries forcing her to lean against him as they navigated the uneven ground. The night air carried the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke, the peaceful suburban scene a jarring contrast to the danger they faced. The gate yielded with a faint creak. Frank paused, listening intently, before motioning them forward into the small backyard. Children's toys lay scattered across patchy grass, testament to Nancy's hastily arranged babysitting. A tricycle, its red paint gleaming dully in the security light from a neighboring yard. A plastic bucket, a worn soccer ball. They reached the kitchen door, and Nancy appeared immediately as if she'd been watching for them. Her face was etched with fear, but her movements remained composed as she ushered them inside. "They're in the basement playroom," she whispered, locking the door behind them. "I told them it was a game, to stay quiet and hidden until Maeve came." The kitchen was warm, homey, dishes from dinner still in the drying rack, a child's artwork magnetized to the refrigerator. Thomas felt a pang, wondering if Alex's childhood home had ever felt this lived in, this cherished. Had his own drive for corporate success robbed his son of this simple comfort? "Has anyone approached the house?" Frank asked, peering cautiously through the blinds. Nancy shook her head. "No, but someone's been driving past every 15 minutes or so. Same car, moving slowly." Frank's expression hardened. "We need to move. Now. Where's the basement access?" Nancy led them through a narrow hallway lined with family photographs. Her children at various ages, school portraits, vacation snapshots. A normal life, now intersecting with something far darker. The basement door opened to reveal carpeted stairs, toy cars scattered across the steps. As they descended, Thomas heard whispered voices and the muffled sounds of a video game. The playroom was bright and colorful, walls painted yellow, bookshelves overflowing with board games and toys. In the center, huddled together on a beanbag chair much too small for all three of them, were the triplets. They looked up simultaneously as footsteps approached, their identical faces registering first relief at seeing Maeve, then alarm at her injuries. "You're hurt," Eddie said, scrambling up and rushing to her. The other two followed immediately, forming a protective circle around their guardian. Maeve knelt despite her pain, gathering them close. "I'm okay," she assured them, her voice steadier than it had been at the hospital. "But we need to go on a little trip tonight." Jason, ever observant, looked past her to Thomas and Frank. "Is it because of those men? The ones watching the house?" Thomas felt a chill. The boy had been aware of the surveillance, had perhaps been watching the watchers in return. "Yes," Maeve answered honestly, "but Mr. Lewin is going to help us." 3 sets of identical blue eyes turned to Thomas, assessing, hesitant, hopeful. He realized with sudden clarity that these children, despite their young age, had experienced enough trauma to recognize the gravity of adult situations. They understood danger in ways no child should. Thomas knelt to their level, ignoring the protest from his knees. "I have a house," he said, speaking directly to them rather than over their heads. "A very safe house with a security system and gates. No one can get in without permission." Mikey glanced at Maeve for confirmation. "Like a castle?" A ghost of a smile touched her battered face. "Even better, it has a swimming pool." This revelation produced the first genuine childish reaction Thomas had seen from them, eyes widening with excitement despite the tension surrounding them. "We need to pack quickly," Nancy interjected, already gathering small backpacks from a shelf. "Just essentials for tonight. We can get more things tomorrow." As the adults helped the children collect clothing and treasured possessions, Thomas noticed that each boy, despite their identical appearance, selected items that reflected distinct personalities. Jason chose books and a journal. Mikey grabbed action figures and a handheld game. Eddie carefully packed the red toy car, Alex's gift, wrapped in a t-shirt for protection. Frank kept watch by the basement window, tension evident in the set of his shoulders. "We need to move in the next 5 minutes," he said quietly. "That SUV is making another pass." They worked with urgent efficiency, years of collective survival instincts guiding their movements. Thomas found himself holding a small stuffed dog, offering it to Eddie, who accepted it with solemn gratitude. Such a simple gesture, yet it formed a tenuous connection, the first fragile thread of trust between them. "Ready?" Maeve announced, zipping the final backpack. Her face was alarmingly pale, the bruising more pronounced under the basement's fluorescent lights. Thomas worried that her injuries might be more severe than she'd admitted. Frank outlined the plan. They would exit through the rear gate, use the alley to reach the next street over where he had parked his SUV earlier as a precaution. The children would need to be absolutely silent until they were safely away. "Remember how we played the quiet game at the hospital?" Maeve asked the boys, who nodded with the serious understanding of children who had learned that silence could mean survival. "This is just like that. Not a sound until we say it's okay." They ascended the stairs in single file, Nancy leading with a small flashlight, Frank bringing up the rear. The house felt different now. Shadows deeper, ordinary household sounds amplified by their heightened senses. Through the front window, Thomas caught the gleam of headlights as another vehicle moved slowly past the house. They slipped out the back door into the garden, the night air sharp with approaching frost. The boys moved with surprising stealth, practiced at following Maeve's lead without question. Thomas found himself next to Eddie, the smallest of the three, and instinctively offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, tiny fingers wrapped around his, a gesture of trust that constricted Thomas's throat with unexpected emotion. They had almost reached the gate when headlights suddenly illuminated the alley beyond, the harsh beam cutting through gaps in the wooden fence. Frank motioned sharply for everyone to freeze, his hand moving to his concealed weapon. For 30 agonizing seconds, they remained motionless as an engine idled just yards away. Thomas could feel Eddie's hand trembling in his, the child's fear a tangible thing. Without conscious thought, he squeezed gently, offering what reassurance he could. The headlights finally retreated, the sound of the engine fading as the vehicle continued down the alley. Frank waited another full minute before signaling them forward again. They moved through the gate and along the darkened alley, every sense heightened until they reached Frank's SUV, a black Ford Explorer with tinted windows, parked beneath the shadow of an ancient oak tree. The investigator opened the rear doors, helping the children climb into the third-row seats. "Belt everyone in," Frank instructed as he conducted a quick check of the surrounding area. "We'll take back roads to your estate, Thomas. Less chance of being followed." As Thomas helped secure the boys' seatbelts, he noticed Eddie clutching the toy car, his knuckles white around the small metal object. "That was Alex's favorite model," Thomas said gently. "He had a collection of them when he was your age." Eddie looked up, his expression cautiously hopeful. "He told us. He said his dad, you, helped him build his first model car." The memory surfaced unexpectedly. A rare Saturday when Thomas had canceled meetings to help Alex with a kit car, painstakingly assembling tiny parts on the dining room table. It had been one of their few truly connected moments, before Thomas's ambition and Alex's growing independence had pulled them in different directions. "Yes," Thomas said, his voice thick. "We did that together." The moment was broken as Frank slid into the driver's seat. "Everyone in? Heads down below the windows until we're out of the neighborhood." The drive to Thomas's estate took 35 minutes. Each passing second weighted with the possibility of discovery. The boys remained remarkably quiet, though Thomas could see their wide-eyed fascination as they approached the imposing gates of Lewin Manor, a 12-acre property isolated from neighbors by dense woodlands and carefully maintained privacy landscaping. Thomas keyed in the security code, and the wrought iron gates swung open silently. As they proceeded up the winding driveway, the house came into view, a modernist structure of glass, stone, and steel, dramatically lit against the night sky. "Whoa," Mikey breathed, breaking their silence. "It really is like a castle." The comment highlighted the absurdity of their situation. Thomas had built this house as a monument to his success, a showplace for entertaining business associates and impressing clients. Never once had he imagined it sheltering traumatized children and a battered guardian, all fleeing some shadowy conspiracy connected to his own company. As they parked in the circular drive, Thomas made a silent promise to Alex and to himself. Whatever it took, whatever resources were required, he would protect these children and expose the truth behind his son's death. The corporate empire he had spent decades building might crumble in the process, but for the first time in his life, Thomas Arthur Lewin understood that some things mattered more than power and success. He helped Eddie from the car, the boy's small hand finding his once more as they walked toward the looming house. Not a CEO and a mysterious child, but simply two people connected by loss, hope, and the unbreakable legacy of someone they had both loved. "Welcome home," Thomas said softly, and found that despite everything, he meant it. Sometimes life's most profound revelations emerge from our deepest losses. Thomas Lewin discovered that the empire he built meant nothing compared to the legacy his son fought to protect. In the faces of 3 innocent children, he found not just a connection to Alex, but a second chance to define what truly matters. What would you have done in Thomas's position? Would you risk everything you've built to honor a truth that could destroy it all? The choices we make in our darkest moments reveal our true character. It's easy to be defined by success, power, or wealth, but the measure of a life well lived often comes down to a simple question. What are we willing to sacrifice for those who need us most? Thomas's journey reminds us that redemption is never about erasing past mistakes, but about finding the courage to make different choices when given another chance. Perhaps the most valuable inheritance we can leave isn't built of money or status, but of love, protection, and the willingness to stand for what's right, no matter the cost. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that explore the complexities of human connection and courage. Comment below with your thoughts on what you would have done in Thomas's place. Would you have chosen justice over comfort, truth over security? Every new subscriber helps us continue bringing these meaningful stories to life. Thank you for listening. And remember, the legacy we leave behind is written not in our successes, but in the lives we change.